Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz. I'm the Rabbi of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia, speaking to you from the pulpit of my congregation. This is my first opportunity to speak to you in the Jewish year 5784, so let me wish you a good and healthy new year. My talk, in fact, is on that subject. What year is it, please? What year is it, please? A new Jewish year has begun, and all Jews agree the year is 5784. But did Jews always agree on what year it was? The answer may surprise you. The calendar system universally in use among Jews today is known as Minyan Yetzirah, literally the, quote, computation system of creation. But that work was not always the basis of our calendar. Before we began using it, we had a different system, the Seleucid calendar. That system had been invented by Seleucus, one of the generals who succeeded Alexander the Great and became the ruler of a state in the Middle East after Alexander's death. We called the Seleucid calendar the Minyan Shtarot, the computation system for legal deeds. Before that, there were several different systems in use in the Bible, none of them comprehensive. When did we switch over to using the Minyan Yetzirah? It seems to have been a gradual process, starting in the mid-3rd century of the Common Era, but not concluding until the Middle Ages. Before then, there was no consensus among Jews about just how to situate our national existence in an absolute chronological framework. If this seems strange, consider there's no practical need for a calendar system to ground itself in the supposed year of the creation of the world. For business transactions and political considerations, the Seleucid system worked just fine. The Christian system, invented by the monk Dionysius Exiguus around the year 500, did not begin with the creation of the world. Dionysius chose the date for the birth of Jesus, which the monk got wrong, probably by 4 to 6 years. Among the several systems in the Bible, one began anew with the accession of each king, and a longer span was loosely based on the years from the imagined date of the Exodus. The main reason for trying to come up with a calendar that starts with the creation of the world is to correlate the biblical tradition with the post-biblical world of Jews or Christians. The Byzantine Church came up with such a calendar in the 7th century, not before. As in monotheism itself, in the calendar based on monotheism, Judaism was the pioneer. The Minyan Yetzirah may look like a dry work of calculation, but when you study it closely, you detect an ideological agenda. It shows that the rabbis of the classical era changed their thinking about how much time had elapsed in the course of history. It undercounted several time spans. For example, collapsing the entire Persian period from 2 centuries to 3 decades. There was an agenda there. The reckoning of the Minyan Yetzirah reached the year 4000 in the Gregorian year 240 of the Common Era. For math buffs, you can confirm this by remembering that the coming year, 2024, in the Gregorian calendar, is the Jewish year 5784, and subtracting 1784 from each number. So the Jewish year 4000, the Gregorian year 240. But in the century and a half before that year, many Jews thought that the world was approaching the year 5000, not the year 4000. Why is this important? Because the Jews of the era right after the destruction of the Second Temple thought that the world was close to the time of the coming of the Messiah. Basing themselves on the first chapter of Genesis, 6 days of creation, And on Psalm number 90, verse 4, Ki elef shanim be'einecha, ki yom etmol, ki ya'avor, va'ashmura v'alayla. For in your sight, O God, 1,000 years are like yesterday that has passed. They came up with the theory that one day, by heavenly reckoning, lasted 1,000 earthly years, and that 6 such, quote, days, close quote, would comprise all of history. The 6th day being the end of days, meaning the Messianic era. According to this theory, the travails that were believed to precede the Messianic era would start at the year 5000, and the Messiah would come shortly thereafter. One famous midrash, for example, stated that the Messiah was born on the date of the destruction of the temple, and that he sat among the beggars of Rome waiting for his call. This mood of expectancy was part of the reason why some rabbis, such as Rabbi Akiva, supported the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Roman Empire. But the failure of that revolt and the massive loss of life suffered by the Jewish people caused rabbis to discourage further messianic speculation. This reorientation also motivated the rabbis to rethink what the year actually was. And they came to the conclusion that they were living shortly before the year 4000, not the year 5000. The practical result of this was that Jews were well advised to tamp down their messianic expectations. There was no arithmetical support for the hope that God was on the brink of ending the exile. A reorientation was in order. Excessive preoccupation with the question, when will God end the exile, was counterproductive, and perhaps even suicidal, and the rabbis now discouraged it. It makes one deeply reflective to ponder that the numbering of the years could be a matter of life or death. When the rabbis who co-authored the Seder Olam Rabbah, the literary source for the Minyan Yetzirah, when those rabbis introduced this calendar, their unspoken desire was to help the Jewish people avoid repeating the tragedy of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Their advice was to stop trying to force the hand of heaven into ending the exile. Live within the life-ennobling terms of the covenant that God has given us, and the kingdom will come when God decides. And that is still sound advice. Ever since the scientific revolution, Jews have underplayed the thought that the calendar system we use is meant literally. The English geologist James Hutton initiated a major reorientation in the Western understanding of how old the earth is. Of course, there are still young earth creationists. On any day you can find them preaching their fundamentalist pseudoscience at the Grand Canyon. There's a Jewish counterpart to that among the Haredi ultra-Orthodox. But for Judaism as a whole, the Minyan Yetzirah is a framework within which to live our time-bound lives in relationship to God, the one who is beyond time. When my students ask me how old the world is, I tell them scientists have concluded that our universe is about 13.7 billion years old. The planet Earth is about 4.56 billion years old. The first modern humans emerged about 150,000 to 200,000 years ago in Africa and spread across the world. My Jewish faith is settled with all that. Our calendar, therefore, does not constitute a literal claim as to the age of rocks. On that score, I am with Clarence Darrow and John Thomas Scopes, the teacher in the landmark 1925 trial concerning the teaching of evolution in Tennessee public schools. But on one point, I give a nod to Scopes's famous opponent, William Jennings Bryan. Darrow was cross-examining Bryan during the trial. He showed William Jennings Bryan a rock with a fossil in it and asked as to the age of the rock. Bryan replied loftily that he was not interested in the age of rocks. He was interested in the rock of ages. A nice turn of phrase. But I am interested in both. Behind the age of rocks, and also inspiring the reckonings of rabbis, I see the working of the Spirit of God, hovering over the waters of chaos and bringing formlessness to order, both in space and in time. Happy New Year.